He just wanted some peace and quiet in his backyard. But in the middle of the night, a security camera caught the HOA cops, in uniform, dumping trash by his fence, the same trash he would later get fined for. By morning, there was already a $1,800 citation in his mailbox for defamation. But what he did next didn't just turn the tables, it shook the whole neighborhood. And what comes out in court? It's going to shock even the ones who've seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. My name is Jeremy Coleman. I'm 62 years old and I live in Arizona, in a small house on the edge of Scottsdale. Same lot, same walls, same dusty wooden fence with peeling paint. I've been here for 28 years. In that time, I buried my parents, raised a son, and retired from the power plant where I spent half my life. My yard isn't the kind that ends up in magazines. There's no golf course grass, no flowers planted in perfect symmetrical rows. But I keep it clean. I trim the bushes, haul away old junk, repaint the fence every few years. I follow the rules. I live with integrity. So when I opened my mailbox one warm evening in March and saw an official letter from the HOA, my first reaction was confusion. And after reading it, that confusion turned to shock. Notice of violation. Lot 43B is in breach of HOA code. Reason: yard clutter. Non-remediable violation. Fine. Talon $200. Deadline: 48 hours from notice. Photos were attached. A rusted-out grill with broken legs. A busted white plastic chair. Scorched, sun-bleached. And a road sign. A giant, faded orange metal rectangle barely showing the words, "Utility work ahead." It was sticking out of the bushes by my fence like some bizarre forgotten monument. I dropped the paper, because I had no idea where any of that came from. I've never owned a grill, I don't use plastic chairs. And, most importantly, that corner of the yard, where the trash supposedly was, bordered the old fence where HOA contractors had been crawling around for the past 6 months. They were digging, laying cables, throwing junk around without a second thought. And the kicker, I personally saw an HOA van, bright yellow stripes and all, pull up by that fence a couple months back. 2 guys got out, tossed something into the bushes and drove off. I didn't think much of it at the time, figured they'd come back for it. Apparently they didn't. And now it was my trash? I was stunned. But things only got worse 2 days later. That Saturday morning, 3 men walked into my yard. Not police, not city inspectors. They called themselves HOA Patrol. Honestly, they looked like they were part of some low-budget cop reenactment. Matching navy polos with HOA logos, lanyard badges, notebooks, and smartphones in hand. Faces as smug as retired FBI agents. The leader was a tall guy in his 50s, thinning hair, and an expression like he just knew he was the smartest one in the room. Introduced himself as Gerald, Senior Compliance Officer for the HOA. Without hesitation, he said, "Mr. Coleman, this is your official notice. You have 48 hours to remove the debris from your property. Failure to comply will result in a $150 per day fine and potential civil action." I tried to explain that it wasn't my junk, that I had witnesses, never owned a grill, and that technically the spot they were referring to was on the borderline between my property and municipal land. Gerald didn't blink. "We know what we saw. We have photographic evidence. If you want to dispute it, expect a summons. Have a good day." They turned and walked away, and I just stood there in my own yard feeling like I'd been charged with a crime I didn't commit. Like no one cared what I had to say. This wasn't just unfair, it was a slap in the face. And right then I knew. This was war. I wasn't about to just sit back and take it. These guys, the so-called HOA cops, thought they could storm into my yard, slap labels on me, and intimidate me. They picked the wrong guy. After all these years living under an association more concerned with mailbox paint than real issues, I'd learned one thing. If you want the truth, dig for it. And I had a place to start. 2 years ago, after a string of suspicious break-ins, I installed a security camera. It covered the corner of my yard, exactly where the clutter suddenly appeared. I sat down at my laptop, scanned through days and nights of footage, digging back weeks. Just as I began to lose hope, there it was. Pause. Nighttime. 2:14 a.m. I recognized that van immediately. White with a blue stripe and the HOA crest on the door. The footage showed it stopping right by my fence. 2 men got out, one tall, wearing a baseball cap, the other shorter, balding. Even in black and white, I knew those faces, Gerald and Matt. The same officers who came knocking with threats. They opened the back. Out came a bulky object, the grill, then the plastic chair, then the utility work ahead sign. They stacked it all neatly by my fence. No rush, no hesitation, like it wasn't even the first time. Then, trunk slammed, doors shut, they drove off. All on camera. Clear, undeniable. I wasn't scared. I was furious. They set me up, deliberately, cold-bloodedly. This wasn't about some trash. It was about compliance. I remembered the HOA meeting months ago. I'd stood up and asked, publicly, where the $27,000 went. Money supposedly spent on solar lights that never appeared. Gerald stared me down and said, "If you don't like how we run things, you're free to leave the association." I refused. Then I didn't pay the new beautification fee. And now, this? I wasn't staying silent. That same evening, I posted the video in our neighborhood's private Facebook group. Nearly everyone was a member. I wrote just one sentence. "Here's how the HOA creates your violations. See for yourself. That's the HOA van. That's Gerald and Matt. That's my fence. And that's their trash." The response was immediate. At first, silence. Then, comments, one after another. First surprise, then anger, then rage. They came to my house, too, with a photo of trash that didn't exist. I got fined for my garden being too dense. On the day I buried my husband. They cited us for plastic curtains in our backyard that no one could even see. They sent me a picture of a dirty deck taken over my fence. I didn't even know someone had been there. People started sharing stories that sounded more like scenes from a dystopian TV show than real life in suburban America. The HOA wasn't about community standards anymore. It had become a punishment machine, deciding who deserved peace and who needed lessons. And it all operated under the friendly banner of order and beautification. My story was the spark. People realized they weren't alone, and most importantly, we had proof. We had video. We had witnesses. We had a cause. The HOA could no longer hide behind cold letters and smug doorstep threats. They started this fight. Now we knew exactly who we were up against. If I was just angry before, something snapped in me the next morning. There was another envelope in the mailbox, embossed with the HOA crest and the words, "Important Notice." I didn't even go inside. I tore it open right there on the porch. $1,800 fine. The reason? Failure to comply with HOA directives and public defamation resulting in reputational damage to board members. Defamation? They planted that trash in my yard. I proved it, posted the video, and now I'm the problem? This wasn't a fine. It was payback. A message, loud and clear. Stay in your lane. We're above the law. That's when I knew this was real. No more games, no more warning letters. This was war, and I couldn't fight it alone anymore. I drove to City Hall, spent 3 hours pushing my way through red tape until I finally got a meeting with a civil disputes advisor. He listened quietly, then leaned in and said, "If you've got that footage, find a lawyer. Preferably one who's tangled with HOAs before. You need someone with teeth." A few days later, I found her. Laura Drake, mid-40s, auburn fire for hair, sharp speech, courtroom eyes, widowed mother of 3, and, as fate would have it, a former attorney for the HOA's own legal department. She'd walked away when she saw what really went on behind closed doors. We met in her office, surrounded by piles of case files. I showed her the video. She watched it once, then again. Then she shut the laptop and said, "This isn't the first time. I've got 2 other clients they did almost the same thing to. But you've got the footage. You've got the witnesses. You've got a bomb." And we lit the fuse. She gathered the documents, filed records requests, launched an independent investigation. 3 weeks later, we filed a civil suit in city court. The claims: abuse of authority, deliberate trespassing, attempted extortion through administrative pressure, defamation, and emotional distress. We backed it with surveillance video. Evidence: screenshots of HOA Facebook group comments, sworn statements from 6 neighbors, a recorded phone call where an HOA rep threatened consequences over the video post. But the real moment came a week later. A court officer delivered the summons in person, right in the middle of the HOA's monthly board meeting. There they were, Gerald, Matt, and a 3rd officer named John, seated at the long table, assigning tasks to the new raid teams. Then the summons hit the table in front of Gerald. He went pale, and the camera rolled, because it was all being filmed by local news station KQWN. One of the neighbors, a retired vet named Randy, had tipped them off and said, "People need to know. We've lived under this for too long." That night, the story aired on the evening news. The anchor opened with, "When HOA power becomes a weapon, who polices those in charge?" The reaction? Instant. Neighbors from surrounding districts came forward. City Hall received dozens of complaints. Under mounting pressure, a judge issued a discovery order for internal HOA documents. We got access to emails, budgets, and internal reports. And that's when the real dirt surfaced. The HOA had purchased equipment no one had ever seen. Funds were funneled to contractors that didn't exist. Surveillance gear, lights, even decorative fixtures were showing up for sale on eBay, under the name of Matt's wife, Gerald's assistant. We didn't need convincing anymore. We weren't just headed to court. We were heading toward the truth and toward accountability. 2 months later, it was over. And you know what? Sometimes justice really does exist. Not always. Not in every story, but sometimes, yeah. The court ruled in our favor. The HOA was found guilty on all counts: abuse of authority, fabrication of evidence, trespassing, emotional distress. The fine: $150,000 plus full reimbursement of my legal fees. But it wasn't just a number. It was a message. You're not above the law. Not your raids, not your threats, not your smug little envelopes. Gerald was fired, permanently barred from holding any leadership position in an HOA within the county. He didn't even show up to the meeting where it was announced. Matt, he was subpoenaed. Turns out the eBay sales were just the tip of the iceberg. He's now under investigation for financial crimes. But the most important thing, our community woke up. A week after the verdict, we held a town hall. Packed house, standing room only. People who'd stayed silent for years stepped up to the mic and spoke. Some cried, some raged, some just listened as the old system fell apart. The vote was unanimous. Dissolve the current HOA board. Elect a new one. Transparently, fairly, with full community oversight. They asked me to run for chair. I thanked them and said no. I wasn't in it for power. I was in it for justice. And I finally got it. As for the trash, that utility work ahead sign they dumped on me, I didn't throw it away. I mounted it on the front of my house, just beneath the porch, bolted it in tight. Now, every time I step outside for the paper or to water the plants, I see it. Neighbors pass by, nod, smile. Sometimes someone jokes, "There he is, the guy who took down the HOA cops." I laugh. But deep down, I feel something more than just a legal win. I got my voice back, and with it, the belief that an ordinary person can stand up for their home, their rights, and their dignity. And for me, that's enough.